So I lost track of time. And you're sitting there in the waiting room. You're waiting for me to come on. I'm doing stumping on my an email. Brilliant. Anyways, good evening and good afternoon, depending where you are. Nice to see everybody. I'm going to get started. Let me tell you what we're going to do. I put it in the message today, but I'll tell you still what we're planning on doing. We're going to look at a number of things tonight, at least get started. First, as a parenthetical statement, for those of you who follow the news, you'll note that today Macron, the president of France, was in Syria, and two bombs went off right near the hotel where he was staying in an attempt to assassinate him. And if you've been following this class, maybe you possibly thought about, oh, that sounds like Archduke Ferdinand. They tried to assassinate him with first with the bomb. It bounced off the car, and then they got him. I'm not saying they should get him, but it's kind of like very interesting this cyclical nature of history, not Jewish history, but more history in general. So we're going to talk about a little bit more about World War One. Again, leaving the Jews out of it for a moment. The entry of the United States into the war. We're going to see some propaganda posters, both from Europe and then eventually from the United States. And then we will hopefully still tonight get into the Jewish aspect of this. So we're going to just jump right in and talk about going back to the First World War, which again, obviously was not called the First World War. Originally it was referred to as the Big War, the Great War. The war to end all wars was World War II. That's what it was referred to. Anyways, this is World War One. Really was more of a true total war, more than maybe anything until that point in history, because it included the conflict included economic, industrial, social resources, and the entire nations were mobilized for a war effort, as opposed to prior wars where soldiers will go out to war and after they come back and there'd be people, that their nations would be living a regular life. But here was really a war effort, which we're going to see again in a few minutes on some of the propaganda posters. By the way, propaganda doesn't necessarily mean negative, but it is trying to get a message across. So what happened was, and we here in Israel can fully understand this, that the distinction between the actual military front and the home front became blurred. The idea that our sons and our grandsons and our daughters and our sisters and brothers and are in Lebanon, they're in Gaza, Syria, wherever they may be at the moment, they should all have be safe. Hashem should watch over them all. It's not like they're 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 miles away. They're in our backyard. And here at home, we are part of that home front. So it's easy to really kind of connect to this moment in history of early days of World War, early time of World War One, where the soldiers went off to battle, but still at home, our home front was still involved. And we'll see how that is in a moment. Governments decided to take some unprecedented actions over to take control of the economy. Factories, there were certain cases, I don't go into any details right now, but certain factories, I'm making one up right now. This is not a fact necessarily. Factories that may have been producing light bulbs were commandeered by the government to then produce weaponry. It wouldn't have been matim for that particular family. That's factory. That's why I'm saying it's a made up example, but this is the idea that we do. Women in an unprecedented amount entered the workforce. Until then, women did not play a very large role in industry, if any. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with the concept of Rosie the Riveter. We'll come to her a different time. And food was for the first time that I know of. I didn't check this out, but I believe I'm right. It was the first time that in national sense, in terms of countries, that food was being rationed officially. Not in we have to ration what we eat, but was actually being rationed with ration coupons and all. And any form of dissent, in some cases, was suppressed by governments as well. In Germany, interestingly enough, just to put a little Jewish spin on this, the economy was being courted by a man named Walter Rathenau, who happened to be Jewish, who was assassinated after World War One in 1922 by right-wing national extremists for the fact that he was Jewish and for the fact that he did what he did in Germany of taking control of much of the economy. was a portent of things to come as we would head towards World War II. Now, the governments of these various countries understood that this war needed to be looked at by its population as a good thing. So they needed to somehow mobilize public opinion and went to work in an unprecedented way as well. I keep saying unprecedented because this World War I was something first time in history when it was such a massive amount of people, massive amount of war, many different countries, and similar or certain things happening in different countries that were involved in the war. So propaganda came in terms of newspapers, posters, movie films, sermons in temple, in shuls, and in churches, songs, official statements. Official statements from governments very often were there to maintain civilian morale, vilify the enemy, recruit soldiers, and also to sustain the will to fight. As you know, the current war in quotes right now with Iran, very unpopular in the United States, very unpopular. And in Israel, the majority of people still believe we need to finish this job. The United States wants them out as quickly as possible. But a very interesting thing I'd like to show you, we're going to look at two different types. One right now will be the European propaganda. Let me find that here just a moment. Here. Make myself small there. Okay. I'm not going to go through every one of these, just to show you a little bit. Let's make this bigger. Okay. This is the wrong one. I want to show you first mostly European. This image should look somewhat familiar to you. This is the man in the picture is as you can see, Field Marshal Lloyd Kitchener, who was appealing to it says it right here on the side, not making things up here, who was appealing to the people to join the British Army. Britons want you. Join your country's army. God save the king. Now, this looks familiar because it will be co-opted by the United States soon after the United States joins the war. Soon we'll see. When it'll be Uncle Sam wants you. And it took the same concept, and we'll use that, which we'll see in a few minutes. Women of Britain say go. What is this? This is a poster that's there to show that the women should be supporting their husbands and brothers and sons, who you see here going off to war. Are you in this? What does this mean? This is in Hebrew, it's actually Aramaic. Tarte mashma means it's a double entendre. It means two things at the same time. Are you in this means, are you part of the war effort? But it also means, are you doing something that's in this picture? Are you fighting? Are you in industry? Are you a female? You're supporting the war effort somehow? Are you this might be financial support? I don't know. Thankfully, he doesn't have a hook nose. Step into your place. Again, you're talking about this addressed people as males, as civilians, and you see it morphs into soldiers. And a couple more of these. Okay, fine, whatever. Okay, this is from India, not American, an India poster, also a recruitment poster. Here's an interesting one. Here you see this is from the government of Australia. They've taken what looks like a monkey or an ape. They put a German helmet on the head with hands dripping in blood, hanging over the earth. Or actually, specifically, this is Australia here. And the concern is that they're saying that if we don't check Germany, Germany will take over Australia. And this is what will become. Instead of Australia, it'll be New Germany. So you'll see this is almost a scare tactic, perhaps. But these were real posters that were available during World War I in order to sway public opinion. The propaganda actually had some very long-term effect. Besides on the actual people themselves, when it came to Germany, it was seen by much of Europe and eventually by America as being a tremendously terrible aggressor. It actually shaped public opinion in ways that eventually would help bring the United States into the war. But there was a little bit of a problem. And I know this is going to come as a huge shock because we've never seen anything that we will call fake news. Some of the post-war, meaning after World War I, Some of it became revealed that some of the propaganda, I hope you're sitting down, was fabricated, exaggerated, to make it look like things were worse than they were. What that caused, and again, I can't tell you this is the first time in history, but it was not a common issue to be cynical about the government. This started to lead to a large percentage of people becoming very cynical about the governmental statements because it would make it harder then to try to sell, in quotes, any future war that may come about, which actually became problematic as they got into the 1930s. People didn't necessarily believe, I'm talking about the governments and also among the people, that how things were really going with Nazi Germany. It's like, oh, we can't really believe that because you told us this. And so, again, what we see nowadays, when we see people posting information, we see governments sometimes posting or publishing certain items, making certain statements. Unfortunately, it becomes, yeah, okay, so what else is new kind of approach? And again, this is nothing new. At least traces back to World War One. What happened in the United States, though? I haven't mentioned the United States yet as far as they're involved because they weren't involved yet. President at that time was Woodrow Wilson, and he actually declared neutrality at the beginning, at the outbreak of the war. Unlike Switzerland, who generally stayed neutral in almost every conflict, just parenthetically, I thought it was very funny. I saw today that Canada approved buying, I think it was 12 or 37 submarines. Okay, it's kind of strange because they're not known necessarily for being a country that goes to war the last many, many, many years. So, okay, let them have their submarines. In any case, the United States and under President Wilson said, we're neutral. It's your war. It's Europe. It's Russia. We're not getting involved in this until April 1917. Now, until April 1917, the United States was officially neutral. And it's 1916, Woodrow Wilson is running for re-election. I'll show you one picture. This is an actual campaign button that was the theme of his re-election campaign. You'll see the date 1916. It says he has kept us out of war. Wilson. I actually used to I don't have from this old, but I used to collect, and I still have a collection of some political buttons going back to Nixon, maybe before, maybe Johnson, but for sure from Nixon on, I kept some political buttons. But this is an actual button that was very popular during his reelection, and his goal was to say, "This isn't our war," and he's saying, his people are saying he has kept us out of the war, and therefore we want to stay that way. We want to be we want to reelect him. Again, that would have been very nice. The problem was it wasn't practical for a couple of reasons. The neutrality became more and more complex. Now, staying neutral when you're the United States of America becomes more and more difficult when war is taking place far away from home, but at the same time, they're not completely disconnected. Even though the United States was neutral, the truth of the matter is that banks and manufacturers were heavily invested in the Allied cause. Money was held. Where did England get money for some armaments? Where did they get people to build everything? Not everything was being built in Europe, and munitions and things, and planes and guns. These things had to be manufactured and could not all be manufactured in Europe. So the Americans were helping the Allied cause already. They weren't involved in the actual war, but again, they were supplying money and armaments, manufacturing, because the British blockade pretty much makes sense, prevented the German government any trade with America, so they had to get their armaments somehow. So the American commerce with the Allies kept growing and growing, while the commerce in Germany declines almost to zero. I'm putting in parentheses here. It's going to come up more than just now. It came up last week. It's come up today. And it's going to come up when we talk later on about, not tonight, about the surrender at the end of World War I, the fact that Germany faces tremendous embarrassment. They have to surrender. Their economy is total ruins. And all these things, jumping ahead for a second, I mentioned briefly last week also, all these things combined to propel a man named Yamach Shemo, Hitler, to want to stand up for the honor of Germany. So keep this idea in the back of your head. So why did the United States, who was neutral until 1917, why did they decide to get involved? So there are three items that led to the United States getting involved. First, Germany made a decision in February 1917 to start again unrestricted submarine warfare. They said that they're going to sink any ship with no warning, any neutral vessel, anywhere they were, any in their territory was going to be sunk, and that, of course, would threaten American lives, American commerce. Again, history repeats itself. This is exactly what Iran is saying. You come into our waters, you come into the Straits of Hormuz, you got to pay the piper, otherwise we're going to blow your brains out. Second thing that comes. So the first one is the fact that Germany is willing to torpedo, literally. By the way, in Hebrew, to torpedo means litarped, the word torpedo. To torpedo any ship that they see that is not part of their group of countries that's fighting with them, threatening American lives and commerce. The second reason, the second factor that led to America getting in, something called the Zimmermann Telegram. There was a German diplomatic communication. It was intercepted by British intelligence, and it was published in the American press in March of 1917. This is the month after the thing I just mentioned about Germany's decision, and revealed that Germany had proposed a military alliance with Mexico. Now, if you don't know American geography, you should know that just below the western part of the United States is Mexico. It borders the United States, if you were not sure. And they offered to help Mexico to do what? What was it? Wasn't just an alliance. Hey, you help us, we'll help you. What was the actual alliance going to be or bring? It was going to help. Germany was offering, you help us, and what we're going to help you do is we're going to recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. We're going to get them back for you into your territory in exchange for fighting the United States. Well, when that got published in the United States press, the public outrage was enormous. Keep in mind, of course, we're talking 1917. We're not talking the 1800s. These states are already been part of the United States. This is not part of the 13 original colonies. It's not Louisiana Purchase, but these are things that happened not that long ago in history. And now all of a sudden, another country, Germany, wants to come to the United States to help Mexico to liberate, in quotes, the occupied territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and bring them back into the fold with Mexico. And Americans were not having anything of it. So that's two strikes already. Strike number three that brings the United States into World War I is the fall of the Tsar in Russia. There was an establishment after the Tsar is out of the picture. I'm not going to get into Russian history tonight. In Russia in March of 1917, so we're talking February and March, just these 2 months became the pivotal time in which the United States makes a decision to enter. The government of Russia looks like it's going to be a democratic government. After the Tsars, rules of the Tsars that go back for many, many years. And when he's out of the picture, the last Tsar of Russia is out of the picture, they're going to move into a provisional democratic government. So what's the big deal? Why does the United States care? Because there was an ideological obstacle until this point. Wilson did not want to frame this war as a war of democracy versus autocracy. Autocracy is a single authority. The Tsar was the dictator, so to speak. I don't know, you can't call him a benevolent dictator, but he was the dictator of Russia. And now it's turning into a democracy. But it's turning into a democracy because now they're on, so to speak, the same footing. It's now a struggle to make the world safer for democracy. Because if Russia becomes a democracy, now the United States wants to ensure that that's going to happen. So let's take a quick look at some of the posters and some of the propaganda that was used by the United States. Let's go to here. Oops. And close that. And here we go. Okay, now, interestingly enough, one of the things you may not even consider is that some of the, let's make this bigger. some of the things that were the posters had to do with food. So let's go to the beginning here. Hold on. Okay, defeat the Kaiser and his U-boats. Victory depends on which fails first: food or frightfulness. Eat less wheat. Here you have B. I guess this is too big. Let's make it smaller. You'll notice 1, 2, 3, multiple. We're going to see more in a minute. Of save a loaf a week, help win the war. Wheat, use more corn. Use less meat, more fish and beans. Eat less fats, use just enough. Sugar, use syrup instead, and serve the cause of freedom. The money that would be saved would be able to go towards the war effort. In World War II, they had what are called victory gardens, where people would plant vegetables, call it a victory garden, and that would be they'd be saving money, not having to spend on the war on food, and they'd be able to. When we get to World War II, we'll talk about it. A couple more. It's all about food. More food. Where is? I thought I had it here. There's a couple from France. Okay. But the most famous, of course, is, let me just bring it up here. Uncle is this. This is the most famous of all. Uncle Sam Needs You. And the reason it now looks familiar, besides the fact, let's come on the screen, that I Want You, is that's iconic from World War I, is because how much it looks like the original one that was made in England with the picture of the gentleman from back over there, and now with the same general idea that they used for the United States. Okay. So it was a propaganda war as well. Oh, sorry, let me just put this on mute. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about the end of the war at the moment because I want to go back now and to just at the beginning as the war is breaking out, back to, let's say, 1914, and talk about the Jews of Europe. Now, some of this we did a number of months ago, maybe a little bit less. Give a little bit more information tonight. I won't repeat everything we've said before, but in order to understand the Jews' position when it came to World War I, how they're involved, how it affected them, and everything else, we have to understand what life was like in 1914. We need to take a look at where they lived. What were their social lives like? What was their political life? What about diversity? I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes Jews don't get along, and there are internal strife. There is internal strife. Jewish world of 1914 was obviously not a single unified community. That should be obvious. I don't think we've been only unified one time, and as Bnei Yisrael stood at the foot of Har Sinai. Other than that, there's always been issues with us. But there was an extraordinary diversity. Difference in diversity isn't a bad thing. It's actually very good. If everyone was the exact same thing, whether it is religiously, how they dress, it would not be so good. It's good to have differences of opinion. Again, open up any page in the Talmud, you're going to find differences of opinion almost every single page. That's who we are. But that's how we grow, by discussion and hopefully not violence. In any case, there was tremendous diversity, anything from completely assimilated, acculturated Jews of Western Europe to the very intensely religious Jews, traditional communities of what became known as the Pale of Settlement in Russia and small towns in Galicia and Romania. I'm taking just one picture to share with you, explain what is this. When we talked about this months ago, I said, I will eventually show you a map. That is tonight. Where is it? Where did it go? Second, give me 1 second to find it here. Oh, I know why. I knocked it out by accident. Just a second. Map of the Pale of Settlement. I closed it by accident. This is the map I wanted. Oh, I didn't close it. I put it in. I'm just talking to myself. You just enjoy what you're doing here. It's fine. Okay, let me just share the screen here. I didn't close it. Here. Okay, let me explain to you what Pale of Settlement was. If you ever heard the expression outside the pale, what is a pale? P-A-L-E. Let me make this bigger. Okay. A pale basically is a board, piece of wood, and it's a demarcation line. So the expression to be outside the pale doesn't necessarily reflect the pale of settlement in Russia, but means being not within the norm. The pale was an area, as you can see here, as far north as Dvinsk, and the Zvitebsk and Smolensk, names that you're probably familiar with, Minsk and Babrusk, Gomel, my grandfather, whom I'm named for, is from Gomel, actually Homel or Gomel, depending where you grew up. And as far as south as Simferopol and Kishinev. Kishinev is actually a place, yes, goes down to the Black Sea. Jews had to stay within this area. When you talk about shtetls, and you talk about shtetl life, this is basically where you're talking about in this area here. Names like should sound very familiar to Zhytomyr, Lublin, Brest-Litovsk, which is Brisk, Warsaw, Lodz, pronounced actually Łódź, Kielce. These names will become, unfortunately, much more well known in World War II. At this point, if you know the name of Simcha from Dvinsk, no Melamelech is over here. This is where Jews had to stay. The Berdichev or the Levi Yitzchak from Berdichev. This is here. This is a huge amount of Hasidic Jewry that's growing over here in many different areas, especially in this area here. So the Jews are relegated to living in those areas. And the reason was because the Jews had to be controlled. Because remember, they're not the cream of the crop. They're not the ones running the government. They were already at this point in the early 1900s, the early 20th century. They have this history already coming with them of always being pursued, always being chased, and always being run out of countries. In general, it was a world in transition, of course. There were all kinds of their long way of life, their centuries potentially of life, the way the Jews were living as religious Jews. They're running up against, and we talked about this, so I'm not getting into details. They're running up against all kinds of challenges: modernity, nationalism, secularism, socialism, all these isms. And there's a new movement, and now you'll see how things start to fit together like a puzzle. A new movement in the late 1800s, early 1900s of Zionism. Remember, we talked about Zionism at length for at least 2 or 3 classes, maybe probably more. But the people living in this part of the world, in the Pale of Settlement, all these things are happening at the same time. Approximately 9 million Jews lived in Europe in 1914 and 2.5 million in the United States. But the largest concentration of Jews, approximately 5 to 6 million, lived in the Russian Empire in the Pale of Settlement. That's where they lived. So the vast majority of the world Jews lived in this relatively small area. There were 2 million Jews also who lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and approximately 600,000 Jews living in Germany. And scattering around the Ottoman Empire, France, Britain, Netherlands. But if you talk about today, the world's concentration of Jews in 2 main places, Israel and the United States. Hopefully that will change. The majority of Jews will all be here in Israel, Bezrat Hashem. And then after you talk about I don't know what percentage it counts for, but the vast majority of world Jewry is between Israel and the United States. At that point in history, the vast majority of the Jews are in Pale of Settlement. You'll notice that if you take all these numbers and add them up, it's not that much bigger than it is today. I think one of the important lessons that we learned from the Holocaust and movies like the Schindler's List and others, if you saw Schindler's List, and I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but there's a final scene that's very poignant. It takes place in real life at Oskar Schindler's grave, which, by the way, I have visited. It's right outside the old city, right outside of Shar Tzion. It's very poignant that for everyone that was murdered, there's, who knows how many descendants they would have had. The 6 million could have been, 50, 70 million by now. We don't know. But again, so the number doesn't get that much bigger between then and now as a result of the war, both wars, actually. What was life like in the Pale of Settlement? What was life like for the Jew at that time? Like I say, first of all, the Pale is the pointed wooden stick or stake, to mark off a boundary. Um, the Under Catherine the Great in the late 18th century, Catherine the Great in Russia, Jews were legally confined that they had to live in these certain areas. Many of the Jews were brought under Russian rule who were Polish. Again, if this part of history interests you, I find it interesting, but it's very boring to get into details. So you can always look to go online, everything's there. The Pale of Settlement was not like a big ghetto. Ghetto, which we'll talk about more, it's an Italian word. We'll get to when we talk about World War II. It wasn't like a ghetto in the physical sense, like we will see later in leading up to World War II or in World War II. The Jews lived in Shtetlach, these little cities, conducting trade, speaking Yiddish among themselves. When they had to deal with non-Jews, they would speak Russian, they would speak Polish, they would speak Ukrainian. For those of you who are familiar with the people in your own family who lived in the Pale of Settlement or how their children grew up with them, they will be able to easily tell you they spoke Yiddish, they spoke Russian, they spoke Polish, they spoke Ukrainian. It was very common at that point in history. But unlike, just like I should say, many others times in Jewish history, Jews were legally restricted from living in most of Russia proper. They were restricted to living in the Pale of Settlement. Now, it looks like a very large area, but in terms of all that Russia controlled, it wasn't that big. Their economic, their educational, political rights, all these different things that we take for granted, both in Israel and in the United States, were severely curtailed by living in the Pale. There was a lot of tension in the Pale of Settlements in the Shtetlach between modernity and tradition, solidarity, poverty, religious intensity, and secular challenge. Unlike Art Scroll, who believes that everyone who perished, I'm kind of exaggerating a little, that everyone who perished in World War II was a man who had a black hat, a white shirt, and black pants, and the women covered their hair and had skirts down to their ankles. That's not true at all. There was a lot of division and divisiveness when it came to religion, and a lot of that came out within the different communities. Again, it's not a good source for historical reasons, but when you look and watch Fiddler on the Roof and you see the children of Tevye and what the changes they're going through, that was pretty much endemic of what was going on at that time period in history. So what did they do? They didn't just sit there all day long and kvetch, although they could have every right to kvetch a lot. The center of their life was their shul, was the Beit Midrash, the Beis Medrash. That was the center of their community life, at least. And Jewish law, of course, governed everything. Shabbat, how we ate, how they married, the rules when someone died. Again, not every single person in Pale Settlement was religious. We can't say that. But in general, Gadol, it was religious life that was the way that was the day-to-day norm within the communities. Again, the Yiddish language was the medium of day-to-day life. Excuse me. When people would go to the stores, when they talk to each other, they go shopping, the newspapers, all of this was in Yiddish. At the same time, there's something else happening. By the way, now you're starting to see, because I'm kind of plopping them in. We've already talked about this time period. We talked about Zionism, which is a factor here. Another piece of the puzzle to put in is this, the same time of a man who we talked about, Eliezer ben Yehuda, who lives in the Pale Settlement and who's reviving the language of Hebrew. So now it's considered among some of the more modern youth, we have to learn Hebrew. So Hebrew was the language of prayer until that point. But increasingly, the Zionist movement wants to revive the language more than just the language of prayer, but wanted to make it to their connection to the land of Israel. Economic conditions for the Jews in the Pale Settlement was pretty bad. Pretty bad. There was poverty. There was tremendous poverty. But there was still concentration in commerce within a handful of trades. The classic figure that you see, again, whether it's in Fiddler on the Roof or just videos, depictions, not videos necessarily, of the trader, the peddler moving from one village to the next village to the next. with tattered clothing, very much how it really was. But we discussed in depth in prior classes, again, much of this economic situation of the Jews and how it affected them as well. Another thing we talked about briefly in the past, and all this I'm mentioning because this is, I need to paint a picture of what life was like for the Jews prior to the beginning of World War I. That's what the purposes of all this at the moment. The reality of the Jews at that time also was anti-Jewish violence, pogroms. Not only were they organized and semi-organized, very often they were sanctioned by the Russian Empire itself. The Great Pogrom Waves, 1881 to 1884, 1903 to 1906, each one going for about 3 years, sent hundreds of thousands of Jews running away as fast as they could towards, and they got out, towards Germany, France, Britain, many of you, and sometimes, and maybe more often than not, to the United States. Insert here the whole background and story of Ellis Island. So you start to see how some of these things start to, all these different pieces that we've been talking about over the last number of months start to come together in this pre-World War I time period. I was just going to say, there was something I was going to mention. I don't remember. Oh, well, I'll come back to you. One of the more well-known pogroms is 1903, what's called the Kishinev pogrom, that it killed dozens and wounded hundreds of Jews over a 2-day period, and it shocked the world. There are, I'm not sharing it with you, there's no reason to, pictures of Jews laying flat, dead, and just horrific conditions that they were in, both those who were injured and those who were killed. If you've seen videos or pictures from the Hebron massacre in 1929, very similar look to what was going on that happened before that in Russia and in Kishinev. It shocked the Jewish world, and it brought a lot of protests. Brought a lot of self-examination. But again, the pogroms were not spontaneous. It's not like, oh, they saw some Jews walking down the street and some bad guys beat their heads in. It wasn't that at all. It was actually not just sanctioned by the government of Russia, but it actually was part of their official policy. Anti-Semitism was used as a political tool. Why? Besides the fact that anti-Semitism, to this very day, is irrational, a mental illness of some sort. Besides that, why would Russia want to use these? Why would they want to kill their own people in a sense or cause problems? Because by diverting the anger of the people to the Jews, it took the people's attention away from the government. And there was a lot of this new approach in the government, whether it was before and by the Tsar, as he's coming towards the end of his life, for various reasons, to get the anger away from the Tsar and from the Russian leadership and put it towards the Jews. And that, by diverting that, would help the government. So that became part of their official policy. Let's take it out on the Jews. The Tsar had a secret police that propagated anti-Semitic literature, including the most notorious anti-Semitic pamphlet ever published, more than likely, which was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I'm not going to get into details on that. If you're not sure what it is, feel free to look it up. But it basically boiled down to a supposed secret booklet that was describing how the Jews wanted to, it was their conspiracy for world domination. Ad hayom hazeh, until today, it is still used in many circles of anti-Semitism, showing that this is what the Jews want. The funny thing is that the world of 8 billion people is afraid of a group of people of 15 million people. And at the same time, what's happening around the world now is all you have to do is look at the United States, France, England, you could have a whole laundry list of countries that the Muslims are doing exactly what they said the Jews want to do. But they're doing it before. They're doing it and act proactively. And they'll say that, and they're going to say it openly. They want to establish the world caliphate. They want to establish Sharia law. You're not going to find a single book, single pamphlet, single choveret, single anything that's legitimate that says the Jews are looking to dominate the world. But the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is, in fact, that pamphlet that is used back then in 1903. It was published in Russia So you're talking 120 years ago. Well, what am I talking about? 123 years ago. And to this day is still a very, very solid thorn in the side of Judaism, a world Jewry, and is a forgery, probably one of the most consequential anti-Semitic forgeries in the history of Jews. Okay. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to pick it up. We'll talk a little bit about the Austro-Hungarian Jewry, because we didn't talk about them, Galician Jews and others, and a little bit more from Europe. And then we're going to see, again, how World War I affected the Jews at that time. All right. In the meantime, I wish everyone a good evening and great rest of the week, Bezrat Hashem. And be well. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yes. Yes.
I was just wondering, could you explain a little bit more, maybe next week? I don't quite understand what it means for a country to be neutral. It's like Switzerland's neutral. I think Sweden is neutral. I don't know what that means.
In general, in general, it's a good question. In general, what that means is, whereas they are not against trying, let's say, Britain winning this war, they're not against France winning this war. They're not sending troops. They're not putting boots on the ground. They're not sending officially. They're helping with sending the Allied forces. Maybe they're sending them the money and they're sending them the materiel and all that. But they are not themselves. The army of the United States is not participating directly in the war. So that's what it means. It doesn't mean they don't have an opinion. That's not what it means to be neutral. It just means they're not involved.
They say classically Switzerland has remained neutral, but I mean, they supplied banks. I mean, they helped with a lot of things.
A lot of Nazi money was in banks, absolutely, in Switzerland. Right. But again, that's not the army. Once you don't have the army involved, let's say, for example,
thank you.
I'll give you an example. The Vietnam War. Okay. Israel did not send troops to Vietnam. But if you ask the government at the time, who do you want to win? Do you want the North Korea? You want North Vietnam or South Vietnam? Do you want the commies to win, or you want, are you in favor of the Viet Cong winning? Of course not. Of course not. They don't want communism to spread. But they didn't do anything. They didn't send any troops there. They didn't get involved in the war. That's being, quote, neutral in the case.
So what did Germany not do to Switzerland? Because Switzerland was neutral. What did they not do? They didn't put troops there?
That's a good question. We will get to
troops there. I mean,
right. Why? Okay. What it mean that Switzerland was neutral? How'd that happen? Did you say, we don't want to have anything to do with you guys. Have a nice day. Do what you want. No, we'll have to see. We'll have to wait to see.
Thank you.
All right,
it's like Qatar and Pakistan. They're neutral.
Yeah, right. Even though they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars to make sure the Jews get overthrown somewhere, every single corner of the world, that's Qatar. But other than that, they're really neutral. Right.
They're neutral. All right.
All right. Laila Tov, everybody.